Since some religious truths are unwelcome, we can do one of two things. We can either dilute the truth until it is watered down and made easy to swallow, or we can speak the words of truth in the tones of love, which make the truth easier to hear and accept. We must do the latter. We dare not, for fear of offending anyone, sheathe the sharp points of Christ's gospel with velvet compromises and plush exceptions. There are people who love religion if it is in terms of a sunset glow on stained glass windows and soft organ music in the candlelit dusk. There are others who are willing to concede that religion offers an excellent training for children, is not bad for older women, and, under certain circumstances, possible even for men, provided, of course, that its precepts do not step on their business toes or cramp their swinging lifestyle. Such people want to hear from the pulpit only a religion of dripping sentiment and situation ethics. In proclaiming God's truth, we are supposed to suit the sermon to the audience, but this gives us leeway only with the pattern, never with the cloth. Most of us rarely get a congregation of all soldiers or all nurses or all divorcees. Sometimes the audience is so blended it baffles you. In my present rectory, we used to take turns every 6 weeks or so at preaching in the huge chapel behind the high red brick walls of the old house of the Good Shepherd. Here, if ever, was an assorted assembly. In the front pews sat a score of Good Shepherd nuns in their gleaming white habits. Behind them knelt a couple of rows of Magdalens in robes of somber black. All around the chapel hung 2 huge galleries. On one side knelt the preservatives, so called because they were teenagers who had not yet gone wrong, but who, because of bad home environment, easily might. On the other side of the gallery slouched the ladies of the evening, sentenced to the institution by the court. Courtesans, if you will. What kind of broad umbrella sermon do you preach to cover all these? We agreed that the best bet was the all-inclusive fundamentals like faith or salvation or Christian hope or God's love for us all and our duty to love one another. Even then, some of them might misinterpret love. You had to build a rainbow arch that would stretch from the apostolic to the alcoholic. Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson claimed he knew a priest who had a double assignment. Each Sunday morning he had to say Mass for a group of convicts in the nearby jail, and each Sunday afternoon he had to give a holy hour for some cloistered nuns. To each congregation he gave the same talk. Maybe he reasoned that they were all shut-ins. So, though the homiletic books always urge us to tailor our talks to the audience, the ordinary priest in the ordinary town rarely gets a congregation of merely farmers or students, or policemen. He just has people. This is not to denigrate the faces that look up at you from the pews. There was a time, I'm afraid, when in more senses than one, the preacher in the pulpit tended to look down upon the congregation. Those were the days when the clergyman was one of the few educated men in the place. This situation held in many little villages all the way, from Old Ireland to New England and from French Canada to Bavaria and Sicily. At the turn of the century, going to high school was the exception rather than the rule. The clergyman, be he priest or minister, while not exactly a scholar among illiterates or an intellectual sequoia among shrubs, was certainly several cuts above his congregation in educational background. It is not hard to imagine that in those circumstances some preachers disdainfully tossed their pearls to the unwashed and unappreciative herd. Like pompous poobahs, they could pontificate in a kind of ecclesiastical snobbery because they had read a few books. One such cleric, in order to impress his rustic flock, used to toss in a multi-jointed word every now and then like Armageddon or Mesopotamia, whether the words fitted or not, so that nobody would forget who was the intellectual among them. To say that things are different now is like hanging a wreath around the obvious. As someone said of the average congregation, how can you expect them to be sheep when so many of them have sheepskins? No longer dare the preacher be condescending or patronizing. He must present his case to equals. Still, there is one corner of the picture that should not be overlooked. Educated the congregation may be, on a general academic level, but this does not mean they need no religious instruction. Their sleeves may wear all kinds of bright collegiate chevrons, and the group together may boast more degrees than a thermometer, but their knowledge of matters religious can be almost microscopic. I still cling to a stubborn conviction that a man can be a first-class surgeon, or a top-flight lawyer, or a high-ranking architect, and still be little more than a kindergarten Catholic. How many professional men could explain promptly and lucidly the difference between the Immaculate Conception and the virgin birth? Once, of course, they knew precisely. But religious information is like any other kind of information. It melts under the quiet heat of passive neglect. Once we knew, shades of the 7th grade and drill sergeant's sister, Eduardo. The boundaries of Brazil, the source of the Nile, the capital of Mozambique. Would any of us like to face a quiz on these now? But time rusts knowledge as well as nails. Unused muscles can atrophy. If we do not use facts, the chances are we soon forget them. At the same time, it is depressing to realize that while the congregation may have only a thimbleful of knowledge about its faith, it has oceans of information about current goings-on. They know much more about Grace Kelly than about sanctifying grace, more about money orders than about holy orders, more about the gas bill than the gospel. It is even possible, if you inquire, that one or the other among them may be under the impression that an epistle is the wife of an apostle, and that an indulgence is something you take Alka-Seltzer for. It is not unheard of that an act of contrition conclude, and to end my life. Amen. I recall having been asked to arrange a solid high mass in that ancient era when we had solemn high masses. Which makes me wonder nostalgically, whatever became of all those dalmatics and tunics. The truth is that most Catholics learned their catechism as children and by rote. It never went through a thinking man's filter. Much of it gradually evaporated with the mists of the years. Part of the preacher's task is to provide a continuing refresher course. His mission is to inform the uninformed and to inspire the informed, because knowledge alone, God knows, is not enough. Many years ago, a little group of us would take our places almost every afternoon at the Congressional Library in Washington. Most were working on some kind of thesis. The atmosphere had the quiet of a cathedral sanctuary, broken only by the turning of pages and the scratching of the old-style fountain pens. It was Academics Anonymous, a convention of lighthouses. Then one fine day, 2 conservatively dressed men walked in, tapped one of the researchers on the shoulder, and escorted him out. We saw in the newspaper the next day that he was a long-sought counterfeiter, brushing up on his steel, engraving there in the Congressional Library at the U.S. government's expense. Now, this man certainly had knowledge, especially in his particular field. He had industry, because he was reading no light novel but a very technical textbook, but he did not have much conscience or character or moral conviction. The other kind of conviction he would acquire soon enough. It all demonstrates that along with information you need integrity, and it is a prime purpose of the pulpit to provide the one and to plead for the other.